Elena told herself she was adapting. That normality was just a matter of time. But time had only made the silence louder. The steady hum of her laptop filled the dimly lit apartment, drowning out the rhythmic tapping of her fingers on the keyboard. The world outside moved forward. The bustling city streets, news headlines shifting from crisis to celebrity scandals. But Elena remained suspended in the aftermath of the Project Ragnarök takedown. She had done her part. The rogue faction was gone. The truth had been exposed. The war was over. So why did it feel like the battle had just begun? Her screen flickered with lines of code, a meaningless jumble until she started decrypting. The routine was second nature now, pulling from dark web archives, scanning for anomalies in private networks. Old habits, she had convinced herself, were only precautionary. Tonight was different. A data stream caught her eye, not because of the content, but because of the structure, the sequencing, the signature that was buried deep within the encryption. It was familiar, too familiar. Elena's fingers froze above the keyboard. A cold sensation crawled up her spine as she ran the patterns against her old archives. The match was nearly perfect. These transmissions mirrored the rogue faction's old framework. But that was impossible, wasn't it? She exhaled slowly, pressing her palms against her desk. She had to be mistaken. Corrupted data, coincidental formatting. There were a dozen explanations more reasonable than the one clawing at the back of her mind. And yet, she couldn't shake it. Elena reached for her phone, hesitating only briefly before dialing. The call rang twice before a familiar voice answered, edged with caution. Elena. She closed her eyes for a moment, grounding herself before speaking. I need you to take a look at something. Elena gripped the steering wheel tighter than necessary, her pulse quickening as the city lights blurred past her. She hadn't seen Rourke in months, maybe longer. It wasn't like her to hesitate. She had spent years priding herself on certainty, analyzing patterns, cracking codes, seeing through deception before it could reach her. But this wasn't just another data stream. It was her gut telling her that something was wrong, that something had survived. She pulled into the underground parking garage, shutting the engine off, but keeping her hands locked on the wheel. The silence pressed against her ears. The longer she sat there, the harder it became to shake the feeling that she was walking into something bigger than herself. Then, just as she reached for the door handle, memory seized her, pulling her back to another moment, another version of herself. 3 years ago, Elena had learned early that survival wasn't about strength. It was about knowing how to disappear. She'd spent most of her life off the grid, slipping through firewalls and skimming classified databases with the quiet precision of a ghost. Government agencies had tried tracking her more times than she could count, but they never caught her. Until Rourke. She still remembered the glow of the fluorescent lights, the hum of the servers around her. She had been mid-exfiltration when the intrusion warning flashed on her screen. She had expected an anonymous trace, maybe a warning shot from another hacker. Instead, Rourke himself walked in, calm and calculating. His presence was heavier than the security alarms blaring around her. You're good, he had said, tilting his head as if he was studying a rare artifact. Maybe too good. Elena had stiffened, fingers hovering over the keyboard, already planning 3 escape routes. You work alone, Rourke continued. But if you want to take down something bigger, you'll need a team. She laughed. She had spent her life avoiding teams, avoiding attachments. People got sloppy. People got compromised. Rourke had leaned forward, sliding a classified file across the table. She hadn't realized at the time, but that moment, the flicker of hesitation before she opened that file, was the first step in a Project Ragnarök. Elena blinked, forcing herself back into the present. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair before stepping out of the car. This wasn't the same as last time. She wasn't being recruited. She was the one making the call. Rourke leaned against the counter, arms crossed, studying Elena with the same quiet scrutiny he had always used when assessing intel. Like she was just another encrypted file waiting to be decoded. She hated that look. You really think they're back? His voice was calm, but the underlying skepticism was unmistakable. Elena exhaled sharply, pushing her laptop toward him. I don't think I know. Rourke's gaze flickered to the screen. Lines of decrypted transmissions scrolled in steady intervals, each bearing the same signature, formatting the faction had once used to mask their movements. It was subtle, almost too subtle. He scanned the data, jaw tightening. This could be mimicry. She shook her head. No. Look closer. The sequencing, the markers. They're not just copying the old patterns. They're continuing them. Silence stretched between them. Elena had been prepared for skepticism. She had expected resistance. But hearing doubt laced in Rourke's voice, feeling the hesitation in his movements, made something tighten in her chest. You don't believe me, she said finally. Rourke sighed, rubbing his thumb across his temple. It's not about belief, Elena. It's about evidence. Just because something looks familiar doesn't mean it's the same enemy. Her fingers curled into fists. I didn't come here for a lecture. I came here because you taught me to see patterns no one else sees. And I'm telling you this isn't a coincidence. Rourke was quiet for a long time. Then, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the counter. His voice was measured, cautious. If you're right, he said slowly, then what's the next move? Elena swallowed. She had spent years executing missions, cracking codes, following plans laid out by someone else. But now, there was no plan. She was the plan. She squared her shoulders, voice steadier than she felt. We get the others, she said, before it's too late. Elena had spent most of her life running solo. It was never a deliberate choice, at least not at first. It had simply been reality. The constant relocations, the never-ending cycle of new schools, unfamiliar faces, friendships that never lasted past a single year. Being an army brat meant impermanence was a fact of life. She learned early on that bonds were fragile, temporary. By the time she was old enough to choose, she stopped trying. She became good at being alone. Independence wasn't just preferable, it was survival. Then Rourke found her. She hadn't realized, back then, what joining the team really meant. She had told herself it was just another contract she would walk away from when it was over. But bringing down Project Ragnarök changed that. Rourke had found her first. Next came Reggie, the investigative journalist. Then Marcus, the ex-military tactician. And finally Sam, the principled everyman who just wanted to live his life. And somehow, they had become something she hadn't expected. Something dangerous. Something necessary. A team. Now, sitting in the dim glow of her laptop screen, Elena let out a slow breath, fingers tracing absent patterns against the desk. She needed them again. She hated that truth, that the faction's resurgence had forced her back into this position. But more than that, she hated the idea of standing against it alone. She could do it. She knew she could. She just didn't want to. That realization settled heavily in her chest. She had spent her life believing solitude was strength. That reliance on others made her weak. But maybe, just maybe, she had been wrong. Elena stared at her phone, thumb hovering over the screen. 3 names. 3 people who had fought alongside her. 3 people who might not believe her now. She exhaled sharply, shaking off the hesitation, and tapped the first contact. Marcus. He picked up on the 3rd ring. Vasquez. She skipped the pleasantries. I need you to listen. It's important. A beat of silence. Then a cautious, go on. Elena pulled up the decrypted transmissions, her voice steady despite the doubt clawing at her chest. That faction, Project Ragnarök, it's not dead. Static. A shift in tone. You sure about that? Yes. She gritted her teeth, knowing what was coming. You were sure last time too. And we finished it. Elena's grip tightened around her phone. Finished doesn't mean erased. We hit the core, but we didn't wipe everything. They adapted. They survived. And they're moving again. Marcus exhaled, the weight of his doubt pressing the silence. I don't know, Vasquez. We all barely got out last time. I'm not asking you to charge him blind, she said, trying to keep the edge from her voice. I just need you to look. Read the data yourself. Then tell me I'm wrong. Another pause. Then, reluctantly, send it over. She hung up without another word, already moving to the next contact. Reggie, former journalist, the cynic, the one who had always demanded proof before action. His response was more immediate than Marcus's, but no less skeptical. Elena, he said flatly, Please tell me you're calling for something normal. She didn't hesitate. Project Ragnarök wasn't wiped out. A sigh. She could hear the exhaustion. You really believe that? I have data. That's not the same as proof. Frustration tightened her throat. That's why I'm sending it to you. Reggie grumbled something under his breath. But when she sent the file, there was no argument. Only silence as he skimmed the contents. Fine, he said at last. I'll take a look. That was all she needed. The last call was the hardest. Sam, the only one who hadn't been trained for this. The man who had been dragged into battle because his government refused to leave him in peace. She took a breath, dialed. When he answered, his voice was calm, detached. Vasquez. She knew why. He didn't want to do this again. Tell me you're not about to say what I think you're about to say. Elena closed her eyes. They're back. A long pause. Too long. Then, I can't do this again. Elena sat in the dim glow of her laptop screen. But for the first time in years, the data meant nothing. Her breathing was steady. Too steady, like she was forcing it into a rhythm to keep control. But the truth gnawed at the edges of her mind, sharper than she wanted to admit. I can't do this again. Sam's words clung to her. They were heavier than any encrypted file or classified leak she had ever uncovered. She had expected resistance from Marcus, skepticism from Reggie, even reluctance from Sam. This wasn't a pause before inevitable agreement. It was a refusal. Flat. Simple. Final. Elena curled her fingers into her palms, pressing against the sharp edges of her nails. She had built her entire life around logic, precision, and control. But right now, all she had was doubt. She closed her eyes, forcing herself to think past the rejection. This wasn't about her. It wasn't about whether people believed in her instincts or questioned her judgment. It was about the truth, the undeniable, mathematical certainty buried inside the transmissions, inside the sequences that matched exactly what the Rogue faction had used before. She knew it was real, didn't she? Elena leaned forward, resting her elbows on her knees, her gaze locked onto the carpet beneath her feet like it held answers she couldn't find anywhere else. For years, she had operated alone, trusted herself above all else. Project Ragnarök had changed that. It had forced her to work with others, to rely on people who had seen different angles of the fight. And now, for the first time since the mission ended, she was realizing something unsettling. She needed them, not just for strategy, not just for manpower. She needed them for proof. Proof that she wasn't losing herself in ghosts and paranoia. Proof that she was still right, still sharp, still the person she had been before the mission had stripped her bare and left her standing in the aftermath. But what did it mean if none of them followed? What did it mean if she was the only one who still believed it? Elena's grip tightened around her phone. The screen had gone dark, waiting for her to move, to react, to decide. Move forward, she told herself. Alone if I have to. The thought should have felt like resolve. Instead, it felt like drowning. Elena had never been good at waiting. She had spent years chasing truth, hunting patterns, cracking encrypted walls designed to keep secrets buried. Sitting still, hoping someone would change their mind. It wasn't in her nature. That's why she was here. The old factory parking lot was mostly abandoned now. Rusted machinery lined in neat rows like forgotten remnants of something greater. The workers were long gone. The industry had collapsed, but Sam had stayed. She spotted him near his truck, arms crossed, posture stiff, like he already regretted picking up the phone. His gaze met hers, unreadable. She slowed her steps, stopping just short of standing too close. You're still here, she said. Sam exhaled, shaking his head. You always just show up when you want something. Elena ignored the jab, keeping her voice steady. I need you to listen. I already did. She tightened her jaw. Not enough. Sam sighed, rubbing a hand across his face. Why are you doing this, Vasquez? Elena hesitated. She could say it was about the transmissions, the patterns, the undeniable proof in the data that the faction hadn't died. It had just slipped into the shadows, waiting. But that wasn't the real answer. She swallowed hard, eyes locked onto him. Because I need you. Sam's expression didn't shift, but something in his posture softened. Elena continued, her voice quieter now. I spent my whole life believing I didn't need people. That working alone was cleaner, safer. But Project Ragnarök changed that. She exhaled, shaking her head. It wasn't just the mission. It wasn't just exposing them. It was us, the team. Sam leaned against the truck, jaw tightening as he studied her. You really think this is happening again? Elena knew she had two choices. Lay out the logic, the undeniable facts, or say what she truly felt. She chose the truth. I don't think it's happening. I know it is, she said, her voice firm but heavy. But that's not why I'm here. Sam narrowed his eyes. Then why are you here? Elena exhaled. Because when everything collapsed last time, when we thought we had won, you were the one who pulled me out of it. And I need to know if you can do that again. Silence. Sam looked away, staring past the factory lot, past the horizon, into something only he could see. Elena's pulse was steady, her breath controlled, but she felt the weight of this moment pressing down on her. She had spent so much of her life believing solitude was strength, believing she didn't need others to make sense of the world. And now, here she was, standing in front of the one person who made her question that belief. Minutes passed. Neither moved. Then, finally Sam sighed. If we do this again, he said, voice careful, deliberate, we're not making the same mistakes. Elena nodded once. Sam stepped forward, gripping her shoulder briefly, just enough to acknowledge what was unspoken between them. He was in. Elena barely heard the knock over the sound of her own thoughts, and she pulled open the door before hesitation could set in. Reggie stood there, arms crossed, looking more exhausted than skeptical, but she knew better than to think that was a good sign. His eyes flicked past her, settling on Sam inside the apartment before returning to her. I've been looking at it all day, he said without preamble, stepping inside before she could even ask. Elena shut the door behind him, watching as he tossed a worn-out folder onto the table. Tell me why this is worth going back, he said flatly. Sam, leaning against the counter, exhaled sharply. That's what you came here to figure out. Reggie scoffed, but didn't argue. Elena sat down across from him, flipping open her laptop, pulling up the decrypted transmissions. The digital heartbeat of something they thought was dead. They aren't just remnants, she started, voice measured. They're moving, coordinating. Reggie leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. I know what the patterns look like, but then you know it's them. He held up a finger. I know it looks like them. But last time we barely got out alive. You really think jumping back in is smart? Elena's jaw tightened. It's not about smart. It's about necessary. Silence stretched between them as Sam watched, waiting, letting them have their fight. Reggie exhaled, shaking his head. I want you to be wrong. Elena swallowed hard. I want this to be just remnants. Some old framework being repurposed. He dragged a hand down his face, the exhaustion hitting harder now. But it's not, is it? Elena didn't move, didn't blink. No. Reggie leaned forward, tapping the folder he had brought with him. You know what happens if we do this, he said, voice lower now, more serious. They won't let it happen twice. Last time, we exposed them should have been enough. Elena shook her head. Enough isn't permanent. Reggie rubbed his hands together, watching her carefully. If we start this again, it has to be the end, Elena. She sat back, locking her eyes onto his, her fingers tightening around the edge of the desk. It will be. Reggie didn't move, didn't speak. Elena continued. You think this is just another battle? Another hit, another exposure, another public reveal? She exhaled, voice sharper now, cutting through the quiet like steel. This is the last time. The only time. If we do this right, there won't be any remnants. There won't be survivors. We take down every last piece of them. Her pulse was steady now. She wasn't doubting herself anymore. Reggie studied her carefully. You're serious. I don't have the luxury of being anything else. Minutes passed. Then, finally, Reggie let out a slow breath. I hate this. Sam snorted. You're not alone. Elena didn't smile. She just closed her laptop, pulse strong. The fight wasn't over. And now, neither was the team. The air in the warehouse was thick with something Elena couldn't name. It wasn't fear, not yet. It wasn't regret, either. It was something closer to hesitation, the heavy weight of old wounds and unfinished battles pressing against them from all sides. Marcus leaned against one of the metal support beams, arms crossed, his jaw tight, as he watched Elena. Reggie stood at the edge of the room, hands deep in his pockets, avoiding direct eye contact. Sam was leaning forward at the table, fingertips pressing against the surface, silent but present. And then there was Rourke. He stood near the back, watching, not speaking, not reacting, just watching. The same measured, calculating look he had used when he first recruited her all those years ago. They were here, but none of them had spoken about why. Elena exhaled, running a hand over her face before speaking. You all know why you're here. Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying her. Do we? Elena met his gaze, steady and unwavering. We're not done. Reggie scoffed. That sounds like a nice way of saying we don't have a choice. Elena glanced between them, feeling the weight of every decision she had made leading up to this moment. She could lay out the facts, the logic, the undeniable truth buried in the transmissions, or she could say what they were all thinking. She chose the second. If we walk away now, she said carefully, voice steady. What happens next time? Silence. Sam shifted, exhaling sharply. Next time doesn't matter if none of us make it through this time. Elena nodded slowly, accepting that truth, but pushing past it. Last time we exposed them. We stalled them, but stalling isn't winning. Marcus leaned forward slightly, arms still crossed. And what exactly are we supposed to do now? Elena inhaled deeply. We do what we do best. We uncover the truth. She let the words settle. Marcus didn't argue. Sam didn't protest. Reggie didn't scoff. They all knew. Elena shifted her gaze to Rourke, the only one who hadn't spoken. He had been watching, measuring, waiting, always waiting. Finally, he exhaled, shaking his head slightly. This isn't just exposing them, is it? Elena held his gaze. No. Rourke studied her for another long moment. Then, after what felt like forever, he nodded once. They didn't say it, but they all understood. The fight had never truly ended. And now, standing together again, they weren't going to pretend it had. They didn't say it. None of them had to. The warehouse was still except for the soft hum of the overhead lights and the occasional scrape of boots against the concrete floor. Elena felt the weight of the past pressing against them, the battles fought, the victories won, and the scars they never talked about. This wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Marcus, arms crossed, studied her like a soldier waiting for his orders. Reggie leaned against the table, scanning the decrypted sequences displayed on her laptop screen. Sam sat in silence, fingers grazing the edge of a discarded coffee cup, unreadable. And Rourke, he stood slightly apart from the others, watching, calculating, mapping out contingencies before the first move had even been spoken. They were all here, but no one had asked what came next. Elena took a slow breath, tightening her grip on the back of her chair before pushing it aside and stepping closer to the center of the room. We're not walking away from this. Her voice was steady, even as the tension coiled in her chest like a wire pulled too tight. Marcus exhaled sharply through his nose. No one said we were. Reggie scoffed, but no one said exactly what we were doing either. Elena glanced at Rourke, waiting for him to speak, but he didn't. Not yet. She ran a hand through her hair, pushing the exhaustion aside. We don't make the same mistakes, she said finally. We don't go in blind. And we don't assume this plays out the way it did last time. Marcus studied her carefully. What are you thinking? Elena glanced at the laptop. We figure out who is pulling the strings. The leadership. The infrastructure. The people who are orchestrating this resurgence. If we hit them first, we stop this before it turns into something bigger than we can handle. Sam leaned back slightly, brow furrowed. And how exactly do you plan on doing that? Elena let the question sit between them, waiting, giving them time to fill in the gaps themselves. Reggie glanced back at the screen. We start by mapping out the connections. Marcus nodded slightly. We find their movements before they find ours. Sam sighed, dragging his hand down his face. We don't let it turn into war. And then, finally, Rourke spoke. We make sure there's no next time. The room was quiet again, but this time, the silence carried direction. It wasn't a full plan yet, but it was the start of one. Elena exhaled slowly, locking eyes with each of them. They weren't questioning it anymore. They knew. This wasn't over. It never had been.